Your first lesson, you will die. That's what Sergeant Kellic told me when I stepped off the transport onto Mordian VII. The stench of burnt promethium and rotting corpses hit me like a fist. My name is Trooper Garix Venn, former hab worker from Necromunda's underhive, now cannon fodder for the God Emperor's endless war machine. You think that makes me weak, but you don't know what I've seen. The Astra Militarum doesn't recruit heroes. It manufactures corpses with laser guns. Every morning, 10,000 guardsmen wake up across the galaxy. By sunset, half are dead. By week's end, maybe a dozen remember their own names. The lucky ones die quick. The unlucky ones? They keep fighting until the enemy puts them out of their misery. This is my testimony from the meat grinder they call the Imperial Guard. Chapter 1. New Meat. The recruitment sermon echoed through Hive Tertius like the Emperor's own voice. Commissar Drecht stood beneath the golden aquila, his black coat pristine against the rust-stained walls of Sector 7 Alpha. 200 of us packed into that assembly hall, breathing recycled air thick with industrial fumes and desperation. "The God Emperor calls!" Drecht's augmetic voice box crackled with authority. "Who among you will answer?" I was 19, muscle-bound from 12-hour shifts hauling scrap metal through the underhive's endless tunnels. My father died coughing blood in a manufacturing accident. My mother vanished into the pleasure districts when the credits ran out. The Imperium offered 3 meals a day, a laser gun, and glory eternal. What choice did a nobody like me have? The processing facility reeked of disinfectant and fierce sweat. Medicae servitors clicked and whirred as they examined us like livestock. Height, adequate. Weight, sufficient. Mental capacity, barely functional. Blood type, compatible with standard combat stims. They tattooed my service number onto my left forearm. 447-889 Tertius. From that moment, Garix Venn ceased to exist. I became a number in the Imperium's vast calculations of acceptable losses. Basic training on Mordian lasted 60 standard days. Drill Sergeant Kellic was a 40-year veteran with a bionic leg and a face like tanned Grox hide. He'd survived the Sabbat World's Crusade, the Macharian Conquest, and 3 separate Orc invasions. The man had buried more guardsmen than most worlds had citizens. "Listen up, maggots!" Kellic's voice could shatter reinforced glass. "The average life expectancy of a guardsman in active combat is 15 hours. Some of you might last a whole day if you're smart and the Emperor loves you. Most of you won't see tomorrow's rations. We learned to strip and reassemble a laser gun blindfolded in under 2 minutes. The M36 Cantrail pattern las rifle became our scripture, and the last pack our communion wafer. Kellic taught us the litany of maintenance. Blessed be the machine spirit that guides my aim. Sacred be the power cell that feeds my weapon. Holy be the Emperor who watches over his faithful. Physical conditioning pushed us beyond human limitations. 5-kilometer runs in full kit before dawn. Obstacle courses that claimed fingers and broke bones. Hand-to-hand combat until someone bled. They fed us protein paste and stim shots, building us into killing machines that could march 30 clicks and still fight when we got there. Weapons training revealed the grim mathematics of Imperial warfare. A standard laser gun could punch through flak armor at 200 meters. Against Orc hide, you needed 3 solid hits, center mass. Tyranid chitin required sustained fire from multiple angles. Chaos Marines? Pray you never had to find out. Your enemy wants to kill you, Kellic explained during target practice. Your Commissar wants to shoot you for cowardice. Your Sergeant wants to use you as bait. Your medic wants to harvest your organs. The only thing keeping you alive is the Emperor's will and your ability to follow orders without thinking. We practiced formation fighting until it became muscle memory, advancing under fire in disciplined lines while lasbolts sizzled overhead. The first rank would advance, take cover, and lay down suppressing fire while the second rank moved up. Simple tactics that had won 10,000 battles across 10,000 worlds. Night exercises taught us the true meaning of fear. Kellic would activate holo projectors showing Chaos Spawn and Tyrannid Hormagaunts charging our positions. Even knowing they were false images, grown men would wet themselves and break ranks. Those who fled got beaten unconscious and forced to repeat the exercise. Those who stood firm got an extra ration pack. The drill instructors shared stories during the brief rest periods between torture sessions. Corporal Nash had survived the siege of Vervenhive, where they'd eaten leather boots and drank their own recycled urine. Sergeant Torres fought in the Ghoul Stars, where the enemy was so horrific that half his regiment went insane just looking at them. Each tale carried the same message. Compared to what waited for us out there, training was a pleasure cruise. Medical training focused on battlefield first aid and combat drugs. How to apply a tourniquet while under fire. How to recognize the signs of chaos corruption. How to inject yourself with a stim shot when your hands were shaking too badly to aim. The Medicaid taught us which organs we could lose and still fight, which wounds were worth treating, and which injuries meant we should just save everyone the trouble and blow our own heads off. Equipment familiarization covered everything from frag grenades to vox casters. We learned to operate in hostile environments wearing full chemical protection gear. We practiced fighting in zero gravity, underwater, in toxic atmospheres, and during psychic storms. The Imperium's enemies came from every corner of the galaxy, and we had to be ready for all of them. Psychological conditioning was the most brutal part. They showed us picked casts from active war zones, space marines torn in half by tyrannid claws, tank crews burned alive in their vehicles, entire regiments consumed by demon princes. The weak ones broke during these sessions, screaming and clawing at their eyes. The instructors dragged them away, and we never saw them again. Commissar Drecht visited our barracks every few days to deliver inspirational lectures about duty and sacrifice. "You are the hammer of the Emperor," he would say, his augmetic eye glowing red in the darkness. "Each of you represents 10,000 loyal citizens working to supply your weapons, feed your bodies, and transport you to glory. Do not disappoint them with cowardice." Religious instruction consumed 2 hours daily. We memorized the Imperial Creed, learned the proper forms of worship, and practiced identifying heretical symbols. The chaplains taught us battle hymns to sing while charging enemy positions, prayers to recite while bleeding out in shell craters, and final words to speak before triggering melter bombs in suicidal assaults. On graduation day, they handed us our uniforms: olive drab flak armor, regulation boots, field kit, and service medals we hadn't earned yet. The lasguns felt heavier than during training, weighted with the knowledge of what we'd have to do with them. Commissar Drecht delivered our final blessing before the transport ships arrived. "You are no longer civilians," he announced to our assembled ranks. "You are soldiers of the Astra Militarum, sworn to serve until death. Remember this moment when the enemy is bearing down on you. Remember that 10 billion souls depend on your courage. Remember that the Emperor watches, and he does not forgive failure." The transport bay doors opened with a mechanical groan, revealing the cramped interior of a Munitorum cargo hauler. 300 guardsmen packed into a space designed for half that number, heading toward a war zone none of us could pronounce. The last thing I heard as the engines fired was Kellick's voice echoing across the landing pad. "Try not to die on your first day, maggots. It reflects poorly on my teaching." Chapter 2. First Contact. The Munitorum transport ship Pax Imperialis was a flying coffin stuffed with human cargo. For 6 weeks, we existed in a nightmare of recycled air, protein paste, and constant fear. The ship's corridors reeked of vomit, unwashed bodies, and industrial lubricants. 300 fresh guardsmen shared sleeping space designed for 150, stacked in bunks like ammunition in a storage crate. Seasickness claimed half the regiment within the first week. The ship's gravity generators fluctuated constantly, making simple tasks like eating a test of endurance. Trooper Valdez lost 15 pounds and developed a nervous tic that made his left eye twitch every few seconds. Trooper Chen started talking to himself in Mandarin, having conversations with dead relatives. The ship's medici declared it combat stress reaction and doubled our ration of anti-anxiety stims. The senior non-coms used the journey to continue our education in creative ways. Sergeant Kellick organized fighting tournaments in the cargo bay, teaching us that pain was temporary, but defeat was forever. Corporal Nash ran weapons maintenance drills during the ship's sleep cycle, ensuring we could field strip a lasgun in complete darkness while half dead from exhaustion. Ship's communications officer Vox Lieutenant Harron briefed us on our destination. Mordian VII, a fortress world guarding the Cadian Gate's eastern approaches. The planet had been under siege for 8 months. Chaos cultists backed by traitor guard regiments were attempting to capture the system's strategic naval yards. Our mission was to reinforce the 23rd Mordian Iron Guard and hold the line until Space Marine reinforcements arrived. Intelligence estimates enemy strength at approximately 50,000 hostiles, Harron announced during one of his daily briefings. Expect heavy resistance from artillery, armor, and irregular forces. The local PDF collapsed during the initial assault, so we're walking into a meat grinder with no reliable intelligence about enemy positions or capabilities. The ship's crew treated us like contaminated cargo. Navy personnel avoided eye contact and gave us a wide berth in the corridors. We were ground pounders, expendable infantry whose only purpose was to die slowly enough to buy time for more important people. The ship's captain never addressed us directly, communicating through junior officers who spoke to our commissar like they were reporting a vermin infestation. Medical screenings continued throughout the voyage. The ship's chirurgeons tested our blood for chaos taint, examined us for signs of mutation, and updated our genetic profiles in case they needed to identify our remains later. They injected us with combat stimulants, anti-radiation drugs, and broad-spectrum antibiotics designed to keep us functional in hostile environments. Entertainment consisted of propaganda films showing glorious Imperial victories against overwhelming odds. Heroes charged into certain death with smiles on their faces, shouting hymns of praise while mowing down heretics with sanctified weapons. The Commissars made us watch these films twice daily, ensuring we understood that death in service to the Emperor was the highest honor a mortal could achieve. Prayer services dominated our free time. Chaplain Mordius led us in reciting the Litany of Protection, the Canticle of Vengeance, and the prayer for pure hatred. We practiced combat hymns until our voices went hoarse, learning songs that would help us maintain cohesion during the chaos of battle. The chaplain taught us that fear was the enemy of faith, and faith was the only weapon that never ran out of ammunition. Letters from home arrived sporadically through the astropathic network. Most were heavily censored by ship security, reduced to generic statements about loyalty and duty. Trooper Martinez received word that his younger brother had been selected for the Adeptus Mechanicus, while Trooper Singh learned that his hometown had been demolished to make room for a new munitions factory. The lucky ones received no news at all. Ship's library contained technical manuals, imperial histories, and inspirational biographies of famous war heroes. I spent hours reading about Lord Solar Macarius, learning how he conquered 1,000 worlds through superior strategy and unshakable faith. The stories always ended the same way: victory through sacrifice, glory through suffering, peace through endless war. Gambling became our primary currency. Troops bet ration packs, personal belongings, and future leave time on card games, dice matches, and contests of strength. Sergeant Kellick ran the most popular game, guessing how long each of us would survive our first battle. The oddsmakers gave me 18 hours, which seemed optimistic considering my complete lack of combat experience. Training continued in the ship's cramped gymnasium. We practiced bayonet fighting, urban combat techniques, and emergency medical procedures. The instructors pushed us harder than ever, knowing this might be our last chance to learn something that could keep us alive. Every lesson was punctuated with reminders about the consequences of failure: dishonor, death, and possible damnation. Food supplies dwindled during the final weeks of transit. Protein paste was replaced with Nutribars that tasted like processed cardboard. Water rations dropped to 3 liters daily, barely enough to prevent dehydration. The ship's crew claimed mechanical failures, but we knew the truth. Ground troops were the lowest priority for everything except dying. Weapons checks became obsessive rituals. We cleaned our lasguns daily, calibrated the sights repeatedly, and memorized the serial numbers of every piece of equipment. Quartermaster Hobbs distributed additional ammunition, frag grenades and emergency rations, warning us that resupply might be impossible once we reached the surface. Sleep became increasingly difficult as we approached our destination. The ship's metal hull conducted sound from the engine compartments, creating a constant vibration that rattled our teeth and bones. Nightmares plagued those who managed to drift off, dreams of burning cities, screaming civilians, and enemies that defied description. Ship's navigator announced our arrival in the Mordian system 3 days before planetfall. Through the observation deck's armored windows, we could see the planet's surface, a grey-brown sphere wrapped in smoke and fire. Orbital bombardments lit up the night side like fireworks, while burning cities created amber glow patterns visible from space. Final equipment inspection occupied our last day aboard ship. Each guardsman received his complete battle kit: flak armor, helmet, respirator, first aid supplies, ration packs, and enough ammunition to fight for 6 hours, assuming average combat intensity. The weight distribution was carefully calculated to provide maximum protection while maintaining mobility under combat conditions. Commissar Drecht delivered our final briefing in the ship's assembly hall. "Gentlemen, you are about to participate in the God Emperor's grand design. Every empire in human history has fallen because they forgot that freedom requires eternal vigilance. We are that vigilance. We are the thin line that separates civilization from chaos." Transport preparations began 12 hours before planetfall. We donned our full battle gear, checked our equipment one final time, and formed up in boarding parties of 50 men each. The ship's klaxons wailed constantly, mixing with the sound of anti-aircraft fire from the planet's surface. Through the hull, we could hear the screaming of atmospheric entry and the distinctive whine of enemy fighter craft. Assault boats waited in the launch bay, armored craft designed to punch through enemy air defenses and deliver troops to contested landing zones. Each boat carried a squad of 10 guardsmen plus their equipment, assuming none of the passengers minded being packed together like ammunition in a magazine. The pilots were Navy personnel with death wishes and reflexes fast enough to make suicide look easy. Final prayers echoed through the ship as we prepared for combat deployment. Chaplain Mordius blessed our weapons, our armor, and our souls, asking the Emperor to guide our aim and strengthen our resolve. The ceremony concluded with the regimental motto: "In life, war; in death, peace; in the void, eternal service." The launch bay doors opened to reveal Mordian VII's war-torn surface, rushing toward us at terminal velocity. Cities burned on the horizon, while tracer fire stitched patterns across the dawn sky. This was it, the moment every guardsman dreams about and dreads in equal measure. Time to find out if our training was worth a damn, or if we were just fresh meat for the grinder. Chapter 3. Hell's Descent. The Assault Boat. Righteous fury dropped through Mordian VII's atmosphere like a falling star wrapped in prayers and terror. 10 of us were crammed into a metal coffin that bucked and rolled with every burst of anti-aircraft fire. Through the narrow vision slits, I watched the planet's surface grow larger with horrifying speed. Burning cities, cratered wastelands, and the distinctive mushroom clouds of orbital bombardments painting the sky in shades of orange and black. 2 minutes to drop zone, Pilot Sergeant Corvus shouted over the screaming engines. His voice carried the practiced calm of someone who'd done this 100 times and expected to die on attempt number 101. "Emperor, protect us all, because the laws of physics sure won't." Trooper Valdez was praying in high Gothic, his lips moving rapidly as he clutched his lasgun like a religious icon. Trooper Chen had gone completely silent, staring at the deck plating with eyes that had already seen too much. Martinez was checking his equipment for the 15th time, hands shaking so badly he could barely operate his weapon's safety switch. The first SAM missile detonated 50 meters off our starboard side, close enough to rattle our teeth and rupture Trooper Singh's left eardrum. Blood trickled down his neck as he pressed a hand against the injured ear, but he maintained formation like the model guardsman he'd been trained to become. Pain was temporary. duty was eternal. "Flak barrier ahead," Corvus announced, with the enthusiasm of someone describing his own execution. "Hold on to something solid and pray to whatever gods you've got handy." The barrage hit us like the fist of an angry deity. Explosive shells burst around our craft in perfectly timed patterns designed to shred aircraft into component atoms. Our pilot threw the assault boat into a spiraling dive that defied several laws of physics and at least 3 regulations governing safe atmospheric entry. The artificial gravity failed for 12 seconds, long enough for Valdez to vomit across the passenger compartment. Through the chaos, I caught my first glimpse of the enemy. Traitor guard positions dug into the ruins of Hive Primaris, like ticks embedded in diseased flesh. Artillery pieces flashed in coordinated salvos, while armored vehicles moved between defensive positions. These weren't the mindless cultists from Imperial propaganda films. These were trained soldiers with professional equipment and tactical doctrine. 30 seconds, Corvus called out. "Remember your training and try not to die in the first 5 minutes. It reflects poorly on the pilot." The landing zone was a nightmare of smoke, fire, and screaming metal. Assault boats from other transports were scattered across the battlefield in various states of destruction. Some had crashed and burned on impact. Others were being methodically destroyed by enemy heavy weapons. A few had made successful landings and were disgorging their human cargo into hell itself. Our boat touched down with the gentle grace of a falling building. The landing gear collapsed on impact, tilting us 30 degrees to starboard before the hull came to rest against a pile of rubble that had once been someone's home. Emergency klaxons wailed as the passenger compartment filled with smoke and the distinctive smell of burning plastic. "Move! Move! Move!" Sergeant Kellick was already up and moving toward the exit ramp. "First one to die gets extra rations." The ramp dropped with a hydraulic whine, revealing our new home, a hellscape of broken rockcrete, twisted metal, and burning vehicles. Enemy fire was already incoming, lass bolts and solid slugs whining through the air with lethal precision. The famous 30-meter dash from transport to cover that had killed more guardsmen than every alien species combined. I hit the ramp running and immediately understood why they called it the meat grinder. The air was thick with projectiles moving at hypersonic speeds, each one searching for human flesh to ventilate. Trooper Martinez made it 5 steps before a sniper's bullet took off the top of his head. Trooper Chen lasted longer, reaching almost 10 meters before a lass bolt punched through his flak armor and cooked his internal organs. The nearest cover was a bombed-out chapel dedicated to Saint Celestine, its walls pockmarked with bullet holes and its sacred windows reduced to glittering fragments. I dove behind a fallen statue of the saint herself, noting with dark irony that her marble face had been shot away by heretical weapons. Even the Emperor's most faithful servants weren't safe in this place. "Contact front," Kellick's voice carried over the din of battle. "Enemy positions in the Administratum building, range 300 meters, lay down suppressing fire and advance by squads." My first shot in combat was a complete miss, the lass bolt flying high and wide to scar a wall somewhere behind enemy lines. The second shot clipped a heretical banner and set it ablaze, which felt like a small victory until return fire forced me to kiss the rockcrete. Training was one thing. Actually trying to kill another human being while they were simultaneously trying to kill you was something else entirely. Trooper Singh had made it to cover behind an overturned Chimera transport, its armor plating still glowing from the explosion that had flipped it. He was firing disciplined 3-round bursts at muzzle flashes in the enemy positions, his military training overriding the panic that was consuming his conscious mind. Blood still trickled from his damaged ear, but his hands were steady on his weapon. The enemy returned fire with professional competence. These weren't the rabid cultists we'd expected, but trained soldiers using proper military tactics. Their fire discipline was excellent, their positioning was textbook perfect, and their equipment appeared to be standard Imperial Guard issue. Someone had taught them how to fight, and they'd learned the lessons well. "Frag out!" Valdez had armed a grenade and was preparing to throw it at an enemy machine gun position. The explosive device arced through the air with mathematical precision, detonating exactly where it was supposed to, and achieving absolutely nothing except annoying the gunner. The machine gun resumed firing 2 seconds later. Commissar Drecht appeared from nowhere, and his bolt pistol spitting death at traitor positions while his command voice cut through the battle noise like a blessed blade. For the Emperor and Mordian, show these heretics what loyal soldiers can accomplish. His presence had an immediate effect on our combat performance. Guardsmen who had been hugging cover and praying for salvation suddenly discovered their courage and began advancing toward enemy positions. Fear of the Commissar's bolt pistol proved more motivating than fear of enemy fire. Nothing inspired heroism like the certainty of execution for cowardice. The advance was a textbook example of Imperial Guard tactics. Disciplined fire and movement under the direction of experienced non-commissioned officers. First squad would advance while second squad provided covering fire. Then the roles would reverse. Simple, effective, and only moderately suicidal when executed properly. Enemy resistance intensified as we closed the distance. Heavy bolter positions opened up from concealed firing positions, their mass reactive shells chewing through rockcrete and human flesh with equal efficiency. Someone was coordinating their defense with professional skill, adjusting fields of fire to create overlapping kill zones that channeled our advance into predetermined ambush sites. Sniper! Kellic hit the ground as a high-velocity round sparked off his helmet. Left side of the Administratum building, 3rd floor, 4th window from the right. Someone put that bastard down before he kills us all. Trooper Singh had been watching for muzzle flashes and spotted the enemy marksman immediately. His return shot was picture perfect. A single last bolt that entered the sniper's position and ended his participation in the battle permanently. 18 weeks of training had produced 1 moment of lethal competence, and Singh had delivered when it counted. The enemy counterattacked with admirable timing, launching a coordinated assault just as we reached the halfway point of our advance. Traitor Guardsmen emerged from concealed positions and charged our scattered forces with fixed bayonets, their battle cries mixing imperial hymns with blasphemous additions that made my skin crawl. Close combat was everything our instructors had warned us about and worse. Bayonet fighting wasn't the clean technical skill we'd practiced in training. It was desperate, brutal, and decided by whoever was willing to be more vicious than their opponent. I killed my first human being with a thrust to the stomach, watching his eyes go wide with surprise before they went dark forever. Valdez fought like a man possessed, his bayonet finding targets with mechanical precision while he screamed prayers at the top of his lungs. 3 enemy soldiers tried to overwhelm him through coordinated assault, and 3 enemy soldiers died learning that some Imperial Guardsmen were harder to kill than expected. The melee lasted approximately 90 seconds before superior numbers and training gave us tactical advantage. Enemy survivors fell back to secondary positions, leaving their dead scattered across the battlefield like broken dolls. We'd won our first engagement, but the cost was higher than anyone wanted to calculate. 8 men had landed with our squad. 5 were still breathing. Consolidate and reload. Kellic was checking casualties while scanning for the next threat. This was just the welcoming committee. The real party starts when their reinforcements arrive. Enemy artillery opened fire as if summoned by his words. Heavy shells whistled overhead before impacting in coordinated patterns designed to fragment our formation and eliminate our command structure. The bombardment was professionally executed, precisely timed, and moderately successful at convincing everyone present that survival was a temporary condition. We took cover in the ruins of the chapel, using its ancient stones as protection against modern weapons. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, seeking sanctuary in a house of worship while practicing the fine art of legalized murder. The Emperor worked in mysterious ways, and sometimes those ways involved a lot of screaming and explosions. "Welcome to Mordian VII, Kellic said, reloading his laser gun with practiced efficiency. "Population, whoever's still alive tomorrow morning. Current weather, bullets with a chance of death. Forecast, more of the same until further notice." Looking around at our reduced squad, I realized that Sergeant Kellic's original prediction had been optimistic. The average life expectancy of a Guardsman in active combat wasn't 15 hours. It was about 15 minutes, and we'd already used up most of our allotment. Chapter 4. Maximum Violence. The second wave hit us 40 minutes after we'd secured the chapel ruins, and they came with everything hell could manufacture. Traitor Guard reinforcements poured out of the Administratum complex like ants from a burning nest, supported by heavy weapons teams, armored reconnaissance vehicles, and what appeared to be a squad of Chaos Space Marines whose black armor gleamed with malevolent purpose. Emperor's bloody teeth! Kellic dove behind the altar as autocannon fire chewed chunks out of the saint's marble feet. Those are Astartes! Real ones, not the training holograms. Someone's taking this little skirmish seriously. The Chaos Marines advanced with the mechanical precision of killing machines that had perfected their trade over 10 millennia of constant warfare. Their bolt guns barked with distinctive double cracks, each mass-reactive shell designed to penetrate armor and detonate inside human flesh. One round hit Trooper Singh's center mass, and there wasn't enough left of him to require burial services. Spread out! Commissar Drecht appeared behind a fallen pillar, his bolt pistol tracking targets with professional competence. Make them work for every kill. The Emperor demands your best effort, even if that effort kills you. The Traitor Guard coordinated their assault with textbook precision. Heavy weapons teams established overlapping fields of fire while assault squads moved to flank our position. Their tactical doctrine was identical to our own, which made sense considering they'd received the same training from the same institutions. They knew exactly how Imperial Guard forces would respond to their attack, because they'd been Imperial Guard forces themselves until recently. Valdez had found himself a heavy stubber from somewhere and was laying down suppressing fire with religious fervor. The weapon's muzzle flash lit up his face like a saint's halo, while brass casings scattered around his position in golden piles. Die, heretics! Die in the Emperor's name! His voice carried over the battle noise like a prayer made audible. The enemy's coordination suggested command-level intelligence and communication capabilities. Someone was directing their assault from a concealed position, adjusting their tactics in real time based on our responses. Professional military officers who understood combined arms doctrine and battlefield psychology. We weren't fighting rabid cultists anymore. We were fighting soldiers. One of the Chaos Marines broke from his squad and charged our position directly, his chain axe revving with mechanical hunger. The sound was like an industrial buzzsaw crossed with a demon's scream, designed to inspire terror in anyone with sufficient intelligence to understand what was about to happen to them. Trooper Valdez emptied his entire magazine into the warrior's torso, achieving nothing except minor cosmetic damage to his power armor. Crack grenade! Kellic armed an anti-armor explosive and threw it with precision born of desperation. The blast staggered the Chaos Marine but didn't penetrate his ceramite plating. The warrior resumed his charge with single-minded determination, closing the distance between himself and our position with superhuman speed. The chain axe took Valdez's head off in a single sweep, the motorized teeth chewing through bone and flesh like they were softwood. Blood sprayed across the chapel's interior walls in arterial patterns that would have been beautiful if they hadn't represented the end of a human life. The Chaos Marine laughed, a sound like grinding metal mixed with distant thunder. I put my bayonet through his helmet's eye lens at point-blank range. The blade penetrated exactly 1 centimeter before stopping against reinforced bone and biomechanical augmentation. The warrior backhanded me across the chapel, his gauntleted fist hitting like a freight transport and breaking at least 3 ribs. I flew 12 feet and landed hard against a stone wall that had been standing for 6,000 years. Commissar Drecht saved my life with a perfectly placed bolt pistol round that penetrated the warrior's neck seal and detonated inside his respiratory system. The Chaos Marine collapsed like a felled tree, his armor clattering against the rockcrete floor. Black blood pooled beneath his helmet, while his chain axe continued revving until its power cell finally died. "One down!" Drecht's voice carried across the battlefield. 11 billion to go! Keep fighting! The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Heavy bolter teams targeted our position with converging fire while mortar rounds began walking toward us in precise incremental adjustments. Someone had calculated our exact coordinates and was methodically destroying our cover with mathematical precision. We had perhaps 90 seconds before the chapel became our tomb. Fall back to secondary positions. Kellic was already moving, his combat experience overriding any sentimental attachment to our current location. This position is compromised. Move before they drop the whole building on us. The retreat was a fighting withdrawal conducted under the most adverse possible conditions. Enemy fire followed us every step, las bolts and solid slugs searching for exposed flesh, while artillery shells bracketed our movement. The rubble field between the chapel and our next defensive position was 200 meters of open ground covered by at least 6 enemy heavy weapons positions. Trooper Martinez had been hit twice, but was still functional, his left arm hanging useless while his right hand maintained proper grip on his laser gun. Blood loss was making him pale and shaky, but his fire discipline remained textbook perfect. 3 round bursts at identified targets, proper breathing technique between shots, ammunition conservation despite the overwhelming urge to spray bullets at anything that moved. The enemy had positioned snipers to cover our withdrawal route, their high-velocity rounds cracking past our heads with lethal precision. Professional marksmen who understood ballistics, wind compensation, and target leading. They weren't trying to kill us immediately. They were herding us toward predetermined kill zones where their heavy weapons could finish the job efficiently. Smoke! Kellic triggered a concealment grenade that burst into thick grey clouds designed to block visual targeting. The chemical fog provided temporary concealment, but thermal imaging and motion sensors would penetrate it within minutes. We had a brief window to reach better cover before enemy technology negated our advantage. The sprint across open ground was pure terror distilled into physical form. Every step carried the possibility of sudden death. Every breath might be your last. Every heartbeat was borrowed time from an account that was rapidly approaching zero balance. Training had prepared us for combat stress, but nothing could prepare you for the reality of running through a metal storm while praying to survive the next 5 seconds. Enemy coordination remained flawless despite our smoke screen. Heavy weapons teams adjusted their fire based on predicted movement patterns, while assault squads moved to intercept our retreat. Their tactical doctrine accounted for standard Imperial Guard withdrawal procedures, positioning their forces to exploit our predictable responses to overwhelming firepower. The secondary position was a collapsed hab block, whose reinforced construction provided better protection against enemy fire. The building's internal structure had partially collapsed, creating a maze of rubble-filled corridors and defensive positions that would force attackers to clear each room individually. Urban warfare terrain that favored defenders who knew the layout and had sufficient ammunition set up overlapping fields of fire. Kellic was positioning our remaining forces to maximize defensive effectiveness. They want this building. They can pay full price for it. Emperor's currency only. No credit accepted. Commissar Drecht had acquired a plasma gun from somewhere and was testing its machine spirit with reverent care. The weapon hummed with barely contained stellar energy, its coils glowing with the light of miniature suns. Plasma technology was notoriously unreliable, prone to catastrophic overheating that killed operators as often as enemies, but its armor-penetrating capabilities made it worth the risk. The enemy assault began with coordinated artillery bombardment designed to suppress our defensive positions and eliminate our heavy weapons. High-explosive shells impacted in perfectly timed patterns while incendiary rounds set fire to anything combustible. The barrage lasted exactly 90 seconds, long enough to pin us down, but not long enough to completely destroy our position. Infantry assault followed immediately after the bombardment lifted, Traitor Guard advancing in disciplined lines while providing mutual fire support. Their tactical execution was textbook perfect, advancing under covering fire, using terrain features for concealment, coordinating movement between squads to maintain offensive momentum. Professional soldiers executing professional doctrine. The street fighting was brutal, intimate, and decided by whoever was willing to accept higher casualties to achieve tactical objectives. Enemy forces had numerical superiority and better equipment, but we had the advantage of prepared defensive positions and desperate motivation. They wanted to kill us, We needed to stay alive. Close-range firefights erupted in every corridor as enemy assault teams cleared the building room by room. Las bolts and slug rounds ricocheted off rockcrete walls, while frag grenades exploded in confined spaces that amplified their destructive effects. The noise was indescribable. Weapons firing, men screaming, explosions echoing through the building's internal structure. Trooper Martinez died defending the main stairwell, his ammunition exhausted and his bayonet buried in an enemy trooper's chest. They fell together, locked in final combat that ended with both soldiers bleeding out on the blood-slicked floor. His last words were a prayer in his native dialect, calling on saints whose names I couldn't pronounce. The plasma gun overheated during a critical moment, its machine spirit rebelling against the stress of continuous firing. Commissar Drecht triggered the weapon's emergency venting just before it could achieve critical mass and take half the building with it. Superheated gas erupted from the cooling vents, filling the corridor with steam that reeked of ozone and burnt metal. Position compromised. Kellick's voice carried through the chaos. Fall back to final defensive positions. This is our last chance to make a stand. The building's upper floors had been prepared as a final strongpoint, with pre-positioned ammunition and improvised explosive devices rigged to deny access to enemy forces. If we were going to die here, we'd make sure the enemy paid maximum price for their victory. The Emperor demanded nothing less than our absolute best effort. Looking down at the street through a shell hole in the outer wall, I could see enemy reinforcements arriving in mechanical transports, fresh troops, additional heavy weapons, and what appeared to be engineering equipment designed for demolition work. They weren't planning to assault our position anymore. They were planning to bury us alive. 30 seconds until they bring this place down. Kellick had reached the same tactical conclusion. Anyone who wants to surrender can explain their cowardice to Saint Celestine personally. Nobody moved toward the surrender position. Chapter 5. The Emperor's Gambit. The building shook like a dying animal as enemy engineers placed demolition charges in its foundation, their intent clear. Bury us alive rather than waste more soldiers taking our position by force. Through the chaos of collapsing masonry and enemy fire, salvation arrived in the form of Valkyrie assault carriers screaming across the battlefield with rocket pods blazing and heavy bolters spinning up to lethal velocity. Air support! Kellick's voice carried over the din of battle as the first Valkyrie strafed enemy positions with devastating precision. Someone called in the big guns! The lead aircraft was painted in the blue and silver of the Mordian Iron Guard, its hull scarred by countless battles, and its pilot apparently blessed with either exceptional skill or a complete death wish. Hellstrike missiles bracketed enemy armor positions, while the door gunners hosing down infantry formations with sustained heavy bolter fire. Colonel Mordrek's voice crackled through every voxcaster on the battlefield, his transmission cutting through enemy jamming with command-level encryption. All Imperial forces, this is Sword Actual. Begin immediate extraction to rally point Beta 7. Air cover is limited to 15 minutes before enemy fighters respond. The enemy had expected this development and prepared accordingly. Surface-to-air missile batteries emerged from concealment and began engaging our air support with coordinated salvos designed to overwhelm defensive countermeasures. The first Valkyrie took 3 hits and went down in flames, its crew and passengers becoming martyrs for the Emperor's glory. Move! 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 Commissar Drecht was already heading for the building's rear exit, his bolt pistol clearing the way through rubble-choked corridors. The Emperor provides, but he expects us to do our part. Our fighting withdrawal through the collapsed building was a nightmare of falling debris, enemy fire, and rapidly diminishing ammunition supplies. Each corridor presented new obstacles, blocked passages, unstable flooring, and the constant threat of complete structural collapse. The building groaned like a wounded beast, its ancient construction finally succumbing to the stresses of modern warfare. Trooper Valdez had been hit twice but maintained his position providing covering fire, his heavy stubber spitting death at enemy pursuit teams while blood soaked through his flak armor. Go! I'll hold them off! His voice carried the certainty of someone who understood that heroism and suicide were often synonymous. The rear courtyard was a killing field swept by enemy fire from 3 directions. 200 meters of open ground separated us from the extraction point, with enemy snipers and heavy weapons teams positioned to interdict any escape attempt. The Valkyries hovered just beyond effective range, their pilots unwilling to risk their aircraft in such concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Smoke screen! Kellic triggered every concealment grenade we had remaining, filling the courtyard with thick chemical fog that provided temporary visual concealment. Sprint for the pickup zone. Last one there pays for everyone's drinks. The run across open ground was pure terror refined into its essential components. Enemy fire poured through the smoke with mathematical precision, guided by thermal imaging and motion sensors that negated our concealment advantage. Lasbolts and solid slugs whined past our heads, while artillery shells bracketed our movement with increasing accuracy. Commissar Drecht went down 50 meters from the extraction point, a sniper's bullet punching through his ceremonial coat and into his chest cavity. He rolled behind cover and kept firing his bolt pistol with mechanical precision, each shot finding its target despite the massive trauma he'd sustained. Keep moving! The Emperor's work doesn't stop for individual casualties. The Valkyrie Iron Will descended through the anti-aircraft fire like an angel of mechanical death, its pilot threading the needle between enemy missile batteries and friendly ground forces. Door gunners laid down suppressing fire, while the crew chief prepared for immediate extraction under combat conditions. No time for proper boarding procedures. Just grab whatever handholds you could find and pray the pilot's skill exceeded his death wish. I reached the aircraft's loading ramp just as enemy assault squads broke through our smokescreen and charged the extraction point with fixed bayonets. Their battle cries mixed high Gothic prayers with blasphemous additions that made my skin crawl. These weren't the professional soldiers we'd been fighting. These were true believers whose faith had been perverted into something unholy. Lift off! Lift off! The crew chief was hauling survivors aboard, while enemy fire concentrated on our position. We're taking too much damage. Hull breach in the passenger compartment. The Valkyrie lurched skyward with half its intended passengers still firing down at enemy positions, their weapons providing covering fire for the extraction operation. Through the open ramp, I watched Commissar Drecht make his final stand, his bolt pistol spitting defiance until the magazine ran dry and enemy bayonets found their mark. Sergeant Kellic had made it aboard with a through-and-through wound in his left thigh that was bleeding but not immediately life-threatening. He applied a field dressing with practiced efficiency while maintaining situational awareness of our tactical position. 4 survivors out of 30, not bad for a welcoming committee. The flight to Rally Point Beta 7 was a masterclass in combat aviation. Pilot Lieutenant Voss threw the Valkyrie through evasive maneuvers that defied several laws of physics while his co-pilot worked the countermeasures like a musician playing a deadly symphony. Enemy fighters appeared on our tail, their autocannons stitching patterns of destruction across the sky. Missile lock! Missile lock! The crew chief's warning coincided with proximity alarms that painted our situation in terms anyone could understand. We were about to die unless something miraculous happened immediately. Deploying chaff and flares, the defensive countermeasures worked perfectly, spoofing the incoming missile's guidance system and sending it spiraling into empty air. The enemy fighter overshot our position and found itself face-to-face with a Thunderbolt interceptor from the 77th Fighter Wing, whose pilot demonstrated why the Imperial Navy attracted the suicidal and the supremely skilled in equal measure. Rally Point Beta 7 was a forward operating base established in the ruins of a commercial district, its perimeter defended by hastily constructed earthworks and pre-positioned heavy weapons. Hundreds of Imperial Guard survivors had gathered here, representing the scattered remnants of 6 different regiments that had been mauled during the initial planetary assault. Colonel Mordrek stood in the command bunker, surrounded by tactical displays showing friendly and enemy positions across the entire operational area. His uniform was immaculate despite the chaos surrounding him, and his bearing suggested someone who had never considered the possibility of defeat. Professional competence incarnate. "Gentlemen, welcome to the war," the colonel announced to our bedraggled group. "You've survived your first contact with the enemy, which puts you ahead of 60% of the forces we've landed so far. Your performance under fire has been noted and will be reflected in your service records." The tactical briefing revealed the true scope of our situation. Enemy forces had achieved numerical superiority across the entire theatre. with professional command and control capabilities that suggested outside assistance from experienced military advisors. Intelligence estimated their effective combat strength at 3 times our own, with superior heavy weapons and air support. Our mission parameters have changed, Colonel Mordred continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. We're no longer attempting to retake this world. We're buying time for evacuation operations and denying enemy access to strategic resources. The new orders were brutally simple. Hold defensive positions for 72 hours while civilian evacuation proceeded from the primary spaceport. No reinforcements were available. No resupply was possible. No retreat was authorized until the last civilian transport cleared planetary atmosphere. We were the expendable rear guard for a doomed world. Medical treatment for our wounds was basic field surgery performed with whatever supplies remained available. The regimental medic cleaned and dressed our injuries while explaining that pain medication was reserved for immediately life-threatening cases. Everything else would have to heal naturally, assuming we lived long enough for natural healing to matter. Equipment replacement came from the personal gear of soldiers who no longer needed it. I received a new laser gun from Trooper Hoffman of the 144th Cadian, whose service had been terminated by enemy artillery approximately 6 hours earlier. The weapon's machine spirit felt strange in my hands, calibrated for someone else's grip and firing rhythm. Your new assignment is 2nd Platoon Charlie Company, Sergeant Major Vox informed us during the reorganization briefing. You'll be holding Sector 7 Alpha until relieved or until everyone's dead, whichever comes first. Any questions? Nobody had any questions. The mathematics of our situation were perfectly clear. Hold the line until ordered otherwise. Kill as many enemies as possible before they killed us, and die with sufficient style to merit remembrance in regimental histories. Simple objectives that required complex execution. The defensive positions in Sector 7 Alpha were excellent examples of Imperial Guard engineering doctrine. Interconnected fire positions with overlapping fields of coverage, pre-planned artillery targets, and fallback positions prepared for fighting withdrawal under pressure. Someone had spent considerable time and effort preparing these fortifications. Night fell over Mordian VII like a shroud woven from smoke and ash. Enemy artillery commenced harassing fire designed to prevent rest and erode defensive positions through constant attrition. Illumination rounds burst overhead at irregular intervals, casting stark shadows that turned familiar terrain into alien landscapes. Get some sleep if you can, Kellic advised, settling into his fighting position with the ease of someone who had done this before. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, and tired soldiers make dead soldiers. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by artillery fire and the distant sounds of combat from other sectors. In my dreams, I was back in the underhive, hauling scrap metal and complaining about 12-hour shifts. Those problems seem trivial now, viewed from the perspective of someone who might not live to see another sunrise. The Emperor's plan was unfolding exactly as it should, with each of us playing our assigned role in his grand design. We were the expendable pieces in a game whose scope exceeded our understanding, sacrificed to achieve objectives that served purposes beyond our comprehension. Faith required acceptance of mysteries that transcended human understanding. Dawn brought new orders, new enemies, and new opportunities to serve the Golden Throne with maximum efficiency. Chapter 6. The Price of Faith. Dawn broke over Sector 7 Alpha with the subtlety of orbital bombardment, revealing enemy forces massed for assault in numbers that defied mathematical comfort. Through the morning mist, we could count at least 3 companies of Traitor Guard supported by heavy armor, artillery positions, and what appeared to be a corrupted Baneblade super-heavy tank, whose hull was decorated with blasphemous symbols that hurt to look at directly. Emperor's bloody bones, Kellic muttered, adjusting his scope to better examine the enemy formation. They're not taking any chances this time. Someone wants us dead professionally. The corrupted Baneblade was the centerpiece of their assault formation. Its 11 barrels trained on our defensive positions with malevolent intent. The Super Heavy's main gun could punch through 3 meters of reinforced rockcrete, while its secondary weapons would turn our entrenchments into charnel houses filled with steaming meat. Facing that monster with laser guns and determination was like bringing prayers to a tank battle. 2nd Platoon had been reinforced with survivors from 4 different regiments, creating a polyglot unit that spoke 6 languages and shared only their common devotion to the Golden Throne. Trooper Kozlov from Valhalla shared a fighting position with Guardsman Chen from Cadia, while Corporal Singh commanded a heavy weapons team composed entirely of Mordian refugees. Target priority is the Baneblade, Lieutenant Voss announced during the pre-dawn briefing. Concentrate all anti-armor weapons on the Super Heavy. Everyone else maintains sector coverage and prays we get lucky. The Emperor protects, but he expects us to aim properly. Our anti-armor capabilities consisted of 2 meltaguns, 1 Lascannon, and a collection of crack grenades that would be effective only if someone could get close enough to plant them manually. Against a Baneblade's frontal armor, those weapons represented optimistic thinking rather than tactical solutions. We needed a miracle, and miracles were the Commissariat's department. Commissar Reichmann had arrived during the night with orders sealed in adamantium and authority backed by bolt pistol. His uniform was pristine despite the battlefield conditions, and his augmetic eye glowed with crimson intensity as he surveyed our positions. Professional competence wrapped in political authority and sanctioned violence. "Gentlemen, today we discover what faith can accomplish when properly applied," Reichmann announced to the assembled defenders. "The enemy believes superior firepower guarantees victory. We shall demonstrate the error in their reasoning through practical application of Imperial doctrine." The assault began at 800 hours precisely, enemy artillery bracketing our positions with mathematical precision, while infantry advanced under covering fire. Their tactical coordination was flawless. Suppression, advance, consolidate, repeat. Professional military doctrine executed by soldiers who understood combined arms warfare and possessed the equipment to implement it effectively. The Baneblade's main gun spoke with the voice of divine wrath, its shell impacting our primary bunker and vaporizing 12 men in a microsecond of stellar fire. The blast wave flattened everyone within 50 meters while shrapnel scythed through personnel who thought they were safely behind cover. The Super Heavy tank's machine spirit hungered for Imperial blood. Lascannon team, engage the Baneblade. Lieutenant Voss was coordinating our defensive fire from a position that provided excellent command visibility and maximum exposure to enemy counter-battery fire. All riflemen, concentrate fire on advancing infantry. Make every shot count. Trooper Kozlov triggered the Lascannon with reverent precision, the ruby beam lancing across the battlefield to impact the Baneblade's frontal glacis. The laser burned through 6 centimeters of blessed steel before dissipating against internal armor plating. Negligible damage to a war machine that weighed 400 tons and mounted enough firepower to level city blocks. Enemy infantry reached our perimeter wire as the Baneblade's secondary weapons began systematic destruction of our fighting positions. Heavy bolter fire chewed through sandbags and human flesh with equal efficiency, while autocannon shells fragmented against rockcrete barriers. The mathematics of attrition were working in their favor with lethal precision. Close combat erupted across the entire defensive line as Traitor Guard assault squads breached our perimeter and began clearing trenches with bayonet and grenade. These weren't the professional soldiers we'd fought yesterday. These were fanatics whose faith had been perverted into something that transformed rational fear into battle rage. They fought like men who believed death in combat would earn them eternal rewards. Corporal Singh died holding the communication trench, his bayonet buried in an enemy sergeant's throat while lasbolt burns crisscrossed his flak armor. His final transmission was a fire mission request that brought artillery down on his own position, eliminating 6 enemy soldiers at the cost of his life. The Emperor's mathematics demanded such calculations. Commissar Reichmann appeared in the thick of the fighting with both pistol blazing, his shots finding targets with supernatural accuracy, while he recited the litany of hatred in High Gothic. His presence transformed panicked retreat into organized resistance, fear into fury, desperation into determination. Political officers earned their authority through demonstrated competence under fire. The Emperor watches. Reichmann's voice carried over the battle noise. He judges our worthiness through our actions. Show him you deserve the privilege of dying in his service. The heavy weapons team managed to land a melter-gun shot on the Baneblade's track assembly. The thermal beam, burning through reinforced steel, and immobilizing the super-heavy tank. The victory was temporary. The war machine's weapons remained fully operational, and its crew began systematically destroying our positions from their stationary firing position. Trooper Chen appeared from nowhere with a satchel charge, his plan obvious and suicidal in equal measure. The demolition device contained enough explosive to breach the Baneblade's rear armor, but delivery required getting within grenade-throwing range of a tank, whose crew was specifically watching for such attempts. Heroism and stupidity were often indistinguishable in practice. Covering fire! Lieutenant Voss had recognized Chen's intent and was coordinating suppressive fire to mask his approach. All weapons on the tank's commander's cupola, keep their heads down. Chen's sprint across 50 meters of open ground was a masterclass in combat movement under fire. He used every piece of cover available, timing his advances between enemy firing cycles while last-bolt and stub rounds searched for his flesh. Training, luck, and divine providence combined to keep him alive until he reached the Baneblade's blind spot. The satchel charge detonated with sufficient force to crack the Super Heavy's engine compartment and set its fuel stores ablaze. Secondary explosions rippled through the war machine as ammunition cooked off in spectacular pyrotechnic displays. Chen had traded his life for the destruction of 300 tons of enemy armor, and the Emperor's accountants would mark that exchange as profitable. Enemy resistance collapsed with their primary assault weapons' destruction. Traitor Guard forces withdrew in fighting order, their tactical discipline intact despite their tactical failure. Professional soldiers who understood when to advance and when to preserve forces for future operations. They'd test our defenses again, but not today. Casualty report. Lieutenant Voss was checking defensive positions while medics worked on the wounded. Count heads and ammunition. I want to know what we have left to work with. Sector 7 Alpha's defense had cost us 23 killed and 14 wounded out of 47 defenders. Our ammunition supplies were reduced to approximately 30% of standard combat loads, with no resupply scheduled or possible. Medical supplies had been exhausted treating casualties from the morning's fighting. The afternoon brought enemy harassment fire designed to prevent rest and maintain psychological pressure on surviving defenders. Sniper rounds cracked overhead at irregular intervals, while mortar shells bracketed our positions with mathematical precision. Professional military tactics designed to erode combat effectiveness through constant stress. Reinforcements arrived in the form of 12 survivors from the 301st Catachan, led by Sergeant Major Torres, whose scarred face spoke volumes about his combat experience. The jungle fighters brought heavy weapons, medical supplies, and tactical expertise gained through decades of fighting the galaxy's most dangerous enemies. Perimeters compromised in 6 places, Torres reported after examining our defenses. Enemy approach routes aren't properly covered, and your fallback positions need serious work. Give me 4 hours, and I'll turn this into a proper killing field. Engineering work continued through the afternoon as Catachan specialists improved our defensive positions with professional competence born of survival experience. Proper firing positions, concealed approaches, pre-positioned explosive charges, and interlocking fields of fire that would channel enemy assaults into predetermined kill zones. Evening brought new intelligence from regimental headquarters. Civilian evacuation was proceeding ahead of schedule, with 70% of non-combatants already evacuated to orbital transports. Our mission parameters remained unchanged. Hold the line for 36 more hours while the remaining population reach safety. Tomorrow they'll come with everything, Torres predicted, cleaning his weapon with mechanical precision. Air support, heavy armor, probably orbital bombardment if they're feeling ambitious. Tonight might be our last chance to get real sleep. The night passed quietly, except for routine harassing fire and infiltration attempts by enemy reconnaissance teams. Professional probing designed to identify weak points and gather intelligence about our defensive capabilities. Standard military procedure implemented by soldiers who understood their trade. Prayer services occupied the pre-dawn hours as Chaplain Mordius led surviving defenders in reciting the Litany of Protection and the Canticle of Sacrifice. Religious observance that prepared soldiers spiritually for the probability of death in service to the Golden Throne. Faith was armor against despair, and despair was the enemy's most effective weapon. Today we learn the price of faith. Chaplain Mordius announced to the assembled defenders. The Emperor demands everything we have to give, and he judges our offering by our willingness to sacrifice for his glory. Show him you understand the privilege of dying in his service. Dawn approached with mechanical inevitability, bringing new enemies, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve the Imperium with maximum efficiency. The mathematics of war would claim additional lives today, but those deaths would purchase time for civilians to reach safety. The Emperor's plan was unfolding exactly as it should, with each defender playing their assigned role in his grand design. We were expendable assets in a campaign whose objectives transcended individual survival, sacrificial offerings on the altar of humanity's continued existence. Sector 7 Alpha was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 7: Blood and Brotherhood. The second day's assault began before dawn with orbital bombardment that lit up the sky like the Emperor's own wrath made manifest. Enemy Navy destroyers had achieved orbital supremacy during the night, their lance batteries and macro cannons reducing entire city blocks to radioactive glass, while their crews calculated firing solutions with mechanical precision. Incoming! Incoming! The warning came too late to matter, as naval-grade ordnance impacted our sector with the force of contained stellar fusion. The blast wave flattened everything within 300 meters, while the thermal pulse set fire to anything combustible. 12 defenders simply vanished, their atoms scattered across the battlefield like prayers made physical. Sergeant Major Torres had survived the Catachan death world for 37 years, fighting everything from Orc Wars to Tyrannid hive fleets, but even his extensive experience couldn't prepare anyone for the violence of orbital bombardment. "Find cover and pray," he shouted over the screaming engines of descending ordnance. The navies decided to solve our problems the efficient way. The bombardment lasted exactly 47 minutes, time to maximize destruction while minimizing interference with follow-up ground operations. Professional military planning that coordinated space-based assets with terrestrial forces to achieve tactical objectives through overwhelming firepower application. The enemy had learned Imperial doctrine thoroughly. Lieutenant Voss had been vaporized during the first minute of bombardment, his command position receiving a direct hit from a lance strike that left nothing except a crater filled with molten glass. Command authority devolved to Sergeant Major Torres, whose battlefield commission came with the traditional benefits: unlimited responsibility and a life expectancy measured in hours. "Sound off! Who's still breathing?" Torres was conducting a roll call while enemy ground forces massed for assault beyond the bombardment zone. "Count heads, check equipment, and prepare for company strength assault with armor support." Sector 7 Alpha's defenses had been reduced to rubble, twisted metal, and scattered body parts that would require DNA analysis to identify. 27 defenders remained combat effective out of the 78 who had occupied the position 12 hours earlier. Our heavy weapons were destroyed, our communications were severed, and our ammunition was whatever individual soldiers carried in their personal kit. The enemy assault force appeared through the smoke like demons emerging from the warp itself. 3 companies of Traitor Guard supported by Lehman Russ battle tanks, Chimera transports, and a squadron of Sentinel walkers whose pilots understood urban warfare tactics. Professional combined arms assault designed to overwhelm remaining resistance through coordinated application of firepower and manpower. Ambush positions! Torres was deploying surviving defenders in concealed firing positions throughout the rubble field. Let them get close before opening fire. Make every shot count because we won't get many chances to miss. The Catachan way of warfare emphasized camouflage, fieldcraft, and intimate knowledge of terrain features that could be exploited for tactical advantage. Torres had transformed our destroyed defensive line into a killing field, where enemy forces would advance through predetermined engagement zones while taking fire from multiple concealed positions. Trooper Kozlov had found himself a melter gun from somewhere and was preparing to engage enemy armor at close range. The thermal weapon's machine spirit hummed with barely contained stellar energy, its focusing lenses gleaming with reflected light from burning vehicles. Single-shot capability that required perfect timing and supernatural courage to employ effectively. "Wait for the command," Torres cautioned, his jungle fighter instincts attuned to the rhythm of enemy movement. "Let them commit to the assault before revealing our positions." Patience kills more enemies than courage. The first Leman Russ entered our engagement zone at 09:47 hours, its battle cannon traversing left and right, while the commander's cupola rotated in search of targets. Standard Imperial Guard doctrine implemented by crew members who understood armored warfare and possessed the training to execute complex maneuvers under combat conditions. Kozlov's meltagun shot was picture perfect, the thermal beam punching through the tank's side armor and igniting its ammunition storage. The Leman Russ disappeared in a fireball that sent pieces of blessed steel spinning through the air while its crew's screams echoed across the battlefield for exactly 3 seconds before being cut short by explosive decompression. Enemy infantry assault followed immediately, Trooper Guard advancing under covering fire while maintaining tactical spacing and proper fire discipline. These soldiers understood street fighting, urban warfare tactics, and the importance of coordinated movement in built-up areas, professional competence wrapped in heretical motivation. The firefight that erupted across the rubble field was brutal, intimate, and decided by whoever was willing to accept higher casualties to achieve tactical objectives. Las bolts and solid slugs ricocheted off debris, while frag grenades exploded in confined spaces that amplified their destructive effects. Combat at ranges where you could see your enemy's eyes before killing them. Corporal Martinez died covering our left flank, his position overrun by 6 enemy soldiers who demonstrated admirable tactical coordination. His final transmission was enemy position data that allowed Torres to call down artillery fire on his own location, eliminating the assault team at the cost of his life. Fall back to secondary positions. Torres was conducting a fighting withdrawal through terrain he'd prepared for exactly this contingency. Leapfrog by fire teams! Keep moving and keep shooting! The withdrawal was textbook infantry tactics implemented under the worst possible conditions. First team would provide covering fire, while second team moved to better positions. Then roles would reverse. Simple doctrine that required perfect timing, absolute trust, and willingness to die for your comrade's survival. Commissar Reichmann appeared during the retreat with a plasma pistol in each hand, both weapons glowing with stellar fury as he engaged enemy assault teams at point-blank range. His marksmanship was supernatural, each shot finding its target despite the chaos of close combat. Political authority backed by demonstrated competence under fire.